over a way to plan your food storage. Let's demystify how to do this. It really isn't that difficult. It just takes a little planning. What is food storage? Food storage is surplus of food beyond what you have in your refrigerator. And usually that is in your pantry, it could be in your freezer, it could be in your long storage. So there's several different ways of providing food storage for your home. But the very minimum that you should have is 3 months worth. And to be able to plan that, an easy way is grab yourself a blank calendar and then start writing down your favorite recipes. I found that breakfast, there was a lot of repetition because there weren't a lot of breakfasts that my family would eat. And I also found, because I have kids in school, that I didn't plan 2 heavy meals per day, but maybe 1 heavy meal and 1 was lighter. If in fact we were in a situation where we were quarantined and couldn't get out and would be eating the 3 meals, we probably wouldn't be eating incredibly heavy anyway. So a light meal like I planned would be like bread with peanut butter and honey, or it would be like a power muffin. Many of my breakfast meals are smoothies, and that is one way that you can elongate a food storage plan, is by having protein drinks. And obviously anything that you incorporate in your food storage, you want to be eating it now, even if it's beans and rice, etc. Unless your family is eating it now, there is actually a thing called appetite fatigue, especially for kids, that if they haven't been eating it, haven't been trying it, they may not even want to eat it at all. So make sure that you incorporate a lot of these things in before you decide to store it. So after you have a 1-month plan, then you get all your recipes for this written down, and then you just buy 3 times worth. You make a list that would be 3 times what is on your calendar. Now, a couple things I've done in the past. I started out by writing down the recipes, recopying them down. And as you can see from this illustration on the Spagos, I wrote on the right-hand side, there's a 12 times, meaning that I was going to make that recipe 12 times in a certain period of time. And then I had the quantities on the right-hand side. Then after I had all those quantities, I would compute those into a master list. And then from the master list, I could compare that with what I already owned or already had in a stockpile. So for example, you could do this on a notebook paper, which I did, or like my sister's excellent at Excel. She whipped that in there and was able to, off of the different recipes, just enter that in, and fast was able to figure out exactly what she needed. Underneath, I have a link that gives you some recipes for some food storage ideas, things that you can make out of canned things that you would be storing anyway. But I also have a comparative or an equivalency chart. So for example, if you have so many cups of baking soda, what does that compute to? Or so many ounces or so many teaspoons, what does that compute to? Should you get 1 big bag or should you get 2 big bags instead of having to buy all these tiny, tiny little packages of things? So use that equivalency thing, and that really does help. But another thing I've done lately is I have just decided to make it faster. I just photocopy my recipes. And yes, some of my recipes are really old and used. Well, this one is Texas sheet cake, and it is well loved. And then with a red marker, I went to the side and put the quantities that I wanted to store for how many times I wanted to make it. This one was for 4 times. Then I have a raw apple cake that my family absolutely loves. Now, bear in mind that when you are going to store things for food storage, you're not going to have fresh ingredients all the time. So for example, this raw apple cake, I had to write in there how much quantity of dehydrated apple I needed to be able to make this. And maybe for eggs, I have actually freeze-dried eggs that I would be using instead of it, or flax seeds can be used in place of that, of eggs. So I'd write down how many flax seeds I would need to have and water for that replacement. Or maybe it's applesauce instead of oil, etc. So you get my drift. If you go back to that example I showed you of my Spagos recipe, where it is, I put down cans of beans that I'd be serving with that. In fact, that's one of the things I did, was I completed out the meal. So if I'm going to make the meal now where I have fresh ingredients, I'd be making spagos with a fresh green salad. And then I'd have frozen bread. But if I don't have that fresh green salad, then I'd be serving it with green beans. So I plan as if I won't have fresh, and then I just eat fresh as I have it. I hope that makes sense. So what's your kid factor this week? The kid factor, of course, would be have your family sit down and have everyone come up with what their favorite meals are, and then plug those into your month calendar. Now, like I said, the bare minimum is 3 months. And if you can do more than that, great. Maybe it's 6 months, maybe it's your year. Now, there are a couple different ways that you can extend the life or create more food storage without a lot of money. And the biggest way, of course, is adding rice and beans. Rice and beans, of course, is a complete protein when put together, and there's so many countries where that's what they eat a lot of. Another thing that's very nutritious is like a 10-bean soup, and you'll also find that in the handouts linked down below. With that, make sure that you have your spices and your bouillons and everything that you need to be able to make those soups. What I like about soups is that it can be extended if you have more people that you need to feed, but also the warmth of it is very satiating, and you can fill bellies that way. So extend it with rice and beans, and also with soups or bean mixes that you can make into soups. And again, be eating these things, otherwise your family may have an intolerance to them. Now, another way that you can expand, as I said, is adding protein powders, so you can get a lot of extended meals out that way. But don't forget to stockpile some vitamins. Even though we are trying our best to have full, complete meals, it's not the same as eating fresh vegetables, live vegetables all the time. So make sure that you've got a really good multivitamin, maybe probiotics, and vitamin C at the very bare minimum. And of course, you probably are very knowledgeable of what kind of vitamins you should be eating anyway. Even when we do have fresh, the ground is very different than it used to be 10, 15 years ago, and we just aren't getting the nutrition from our foods that we used to be able to. Now, another thing I wanted to add was it isn't just about wheat anymore. You can store wheat, and I do have wheat, but I have many different kinds of grains too. Amaranth is another really good grain to have. It's very high protein. It's wonderful to add into stews and soups. You can make it into so many different kinds of things. So be adventurous about what other kinds of grains that you want. Oatmeal is another great one. Another good thing to store is nuts. And I just barely got into dehydrating a lot, and soaking your nuts and then dehydrating them is, especially with the almonds that doesn't have a high oil content, is a great way to help them store a lot longer. So be adventurous on what other things you want, especially if you have gluten intolerance. Store what you eat. Do not just store what people tell you to store. One other way of expanding your food storage ability, especially in the long-term storage, would be freeze-dried foods. Now, freeze-dried foods are very expensive, and some of them are very good, and some of them are very average. So be very cautious. I'm going to throw out this big caution. And the reason is, make sure you know what you are getting. When I investigated some of the freeze-dried foods out there, I found that their foods were basically carbohydrate driven. There was very little protein involved with it. In fact, one of them touted that they were the lowest cost per freeze-dried food, but when I looked into it, it was spaghetti that you would have to use 20 minutes of hot water and fuel to cook, and then 10 minutes to cook the sauce. So now I had 30 minutes of fuel that I needed to come up with. In my mind, freeze-dried meant heat some hot water and then hydrate what has been frozen. Another thing they had in there, they had a lot of soup mixes that took 20 minutes of fuel and heating. Well, I can go buy soup mixes that only take 20 minutes to cook. So I didn't see the advantage. In fact, I thought there was a disadvantage of that, because I can store my own pasta. I can store sauces that are ready-made, and granted, they may not last 10, 15 years shelf life. But what they weren't telling me is how much fuel I was going to have to be able to cook that. Bear in mind that also when you are, let's go back to your recipes, when you are having to cook pastas and things, make sure you know that you're going to have water to do that. So I also put on there how much water I will need if it's pasta driven, etc., so that I know what I need to store just for my recipes. So freeze-dried, I absolutely love freeze-dried. I actually just got a dehydrator, but I've been doing freeze-drying for a year. One of my favorites. If you can afford it, let me tell you, it's absolutely incredible. I love buying the big packages of the frozen green or the fresh greens, the super greens, put it in my freezer, and then once it's frozen, I crunch it while it's still in the bag, put it in my trays and freeze dry it. That way I have all these super greens that I can put in, yes, my smoothies. And some of you have seen my Vortex blender that's just a hand blender, but it works great. Another thing is I can put it in soups, I can put it in stews, I can put it in casseroles, but with a freeze dryer, it retains not only color and shape, but nutritional value. So that's what I love about the freeze dryer. Yes, they are quite expensive, but I've been having fun with freeze drying avocados, the salsa that goes with it, you name it. The grapes turn out absolutely amazing. So there's so many different things. All my cheeses I've dehydrated so that all my recipes I can hydrate those back up. The dehydrator I like for different reasons. The dehydrator, of course, a lot of our nuts, we should be soaking them anyway to get rid of the enzyme that's on it that keeps them from sprouting. That enzyme is very difficult on our liver. So if we soak those nuts and then dehydrate them, especially with almonds that are a lower oil, they will actually store a lot longer. Here is freeze-dried grapes and also freeze-dried raspberries, and they absolutely look the same as fresh. So there's different ways to use different things, different ways to save the harvest, and that's one of the things that you need to be looking at. For example, I absolutely love now canning chicken. It was probably one of the simplest things that you could can. I had a mother that canned all the time, but she didn't really teach me how to do it, or I chose not to learn, truth be known. And now I'm finding that this really isn't as difficult as I thought it would be. My concern was, what about an earthquake? What about all those glass bottles? Am I going to lose all of that hard work? Well, I found that there were some grocery stores that I could order bottles from. This was Walmart that came, and look at how this box came. And it was segregated out, and that way I just can my things, put it right back in the box, label the box, and put it on my shelf, and it's actually protected better than if it's just loose bottles hanging around there. Okay. Two more quick things I want to mention about food storage. One of the things is if you've got a lot of wheat, don't get rid of it. A lot of people say, I've got this old wheat, I should probably throw it away. Well, don't throw it away because you can probably sprout the wheat. Now, wheat is very acidic on our bodies, but when it's sprouted, it becomes alkaline. And in fact, it increases the vitamin E by, I believe, 2,000%. And some of the other vitamins increase like 200 to 600%. So it becomes this acidic thing that becomes this power nutrient for us when it's sprouted. If your wheat has been preserved with an oxygen pack, you probably have a 50% chance that it will sprout. Now, if you're doing any new wheat, I buy the wheat in the buckets without any preservation in them, and then I put the diatomaceous earth in. I put at least 2 cups, and I stir it down in 2 to 4 cups in a 5-gallon bucket. And anytime I'm doing beans, pastas, anything, I just sprinkle the diatomaceous earth in there. It is preserved in most of our industry anyway with diatomaceous earth. And diatomaceous earth is like seashells that have been crushed up. So the larvae, the weevil, any of those bugs that get in there, they literally can't survive because of the diatomaceous earth. And that is something that you can just shake out, or you can wash out if you when you're ready to prepare it. But clover is another really yummy one to be able to sprout. There's so many different kinds, and just with a little bottle, piece of chiffon, and a rubber band, you can do sprouting. You may even want to invest in a little sprouting tray, but this will bring the nutrition to your food storage. This could be another kid factor, is learning how to sprout a few things. The very last thing I want to talk about for your food storage is having seeds. These are hybrid seeds, and this is a seed vault. You can get, they're already preserved in packages for you. There's lots of different kinds that you can get. You can get salsa bars, and you can get some that are just kale, or whatever it is that you feel that your family would eat. Rooted things like turnips, parsnips, carrots, etc. is another really good one, because those hardy ones can actually be grown through the wintertime. But the hybrid, you can let those go to seed and actually cultivate more seeds for your next season. So make sure they're hybrid. Also, having a homesteading book of some sort, or a gardening book, and the tools to go with it is, I think, incredibly important. Now, I was able to grow a little bit in my gardening per square foot boxes that I have. But I did find that there were some things that I needed to learn. That's actually another fun kid factor would be grow some little things, even whether it's fall time, winter time, grow some little things on your kitchen sink so that kids can see what it's like to grow seeds. But one of the things I found was, what am I going to do if I really need to grow some food for my family? I have a lot of grass, but a very little planting area, garden area. So I did go and buy lots of in reserve, these bags of dirt. And my plan is I will just lay them out. I'll make 2 slits in the top, and I'll plant down into the bags and just water into the bags. So my garden will literally come out of the bags. Anyway, it's an easy, fun, fast tip and an easy way to vertically right now store your garden until you need it. So I hope this simplified planning food storage. It doesn't need to be highly complicated, but the important thing is plan it and execute it. Every time you go to the grocery store, get more things. If financially you can afford to get it done right now, I would strongly encourage you to get it done now. Let's have in surplus. We just don't know what will happen when, and how will we look into the faces of our little ones and say, gosh, I knew I was supposed to do this. I just didn't take the time or the effort. So go out there, get your reserve.